It's been a very productive offseason so far over here at Football Fanalysts Network, and I've been working really hard to get you guys prepared for the season. And along the way, I've stumbled across some really interesting things that I hadn't really noticed before. And what I found in one of those things was that there is a 2023 fantasy football draft strategy that nobody is really talking about. So we're going to discuss this 2023 fantasy football draft strategy, and we're going to discuss why nobody really talks about it. And that part is specifically very important to all of this, so make sure you watch to the end. So when it comes to fantasy football running backs, all of us really want a top tier guy. You know, a guy like Christian McCaffrey or a guy like Austin Eckler, typically a Nick Chubb, a Derrick Henry, anyone in that top tier of running backs in fantasy football, you want one of those guys. And obviously what separates those guys from the rest? It's the volume and the efficiency that they have with that volume. Well, the reality is, in this NFL, most of the running backs in the NFL, besides those guys, really are not volume monster type of guys. So most of us aren't going to have the opportunity to take ourselves a Christian McCaffrey, an Austin Eckler, a Derrick Henry, a Nick Chubb. And when you're talking about fantasy football draft strategies, some people like to go with that zero running back strategy. A lot of times, people like to punt on running backs early so they can get themselves really good wide receivers, a really good tight end, a really good quarterback, and then just have a running back later on that could give them running back 2 upside, running back 3 upside. And whether it's a zero running back strategy or a 1 running back early strategy that you're targeting, we're going to have to find a very efficient back later on in the draft for you to get that fantasy upside. So what we need to do here is we need to find the most efficient running backs with adequate volume, because that's the reality. Like I said earlier, most running backs are not getting Nick Chubb level volume, Derrick Henry level volume, all the other guys I named. We need someone who's got at least adequate volume. So on the screen, you can see the list of running backs who averaged over 5 yards a carry or 4.9 yards per carry in 2022. And we're looking at guys who had at least 90 carries for this, because I don't want to look at guys who had 10 carries and say that's the blueprint we want to follow because that's going to translate. No, I need at least 90 carries from you to really count that. And I want to hone in on a couple of guys out of that list. The guys that I want to hone in are J.K. Dobbins. He had 90 carries, rushed for 5.7 yards per carry. Aaron Jones, over 200 carries, 5.3 yards per carry. Tony Pollard, 5.2 yards per carry. Nick Chubb, 5 yards a carry. And then right below them, you had guys like Miles Sanders and Isaiah Pacheco running for 4.9 yards per carry. So those are all really good metrics right there. And those guys, with the exception of a Nick Chubb, they're not volume monsters. But with that level of efficiency and adequate volume, which most of them have adequate volume, they should be good in fantasy football. The fantasy points per game should be very good. So when we take a look at all of their fantasy points per game, here's what we see. Nick Chubb, 15.8 fantasy points per game. Pollard, 14.3. Aaron Jones, 12.9. Miles Sanders, 12.2. J.K. Dobbins, 9.7. And Isaiah Pacheco, 7.6. So with the exception of J.K. Dobbins and Isaiah Pacheco, those guys were giving you running back 1 or running back 2 type of numbers when we are looking at it from a fantasy point per game perspective. So what's the common factor here amongst all of those guys? Let's take a look at all of them and find out what's in common. Obviously, it's not the talent level. You've got a guy like Nick Chubb who is above all of those other guys. I would say Tony Pollard is in that range as well. Aaron Jones used to be, may not be in that range anymore. What the commonality here, and this is what we need to pay super close attention to, is that they all had top offensive lines in 2022. All of those teams had a top 10 offensive line in 2022, and specifically, the top 4 were Philadelphia, Miles Sanders, Baltimore, J.K. Dobbins, Green Bay, Aaron Jones, and Kansas City, Isaiah Pacheco. So a really important thing here that we could do as a fantasy football community is look for the top offensive lines in 2023, and we can find that list on ProFootballNetwork.com. They always come out with a top offensive lines list before the season and after the season. So let's get into the real problem. Why is nobody else talking about this? Why are more fantasy football analysts not talking about this? It's very, very important. And honestly, it's the reason that you need to use it in 2023. So let's take a look at the top 10 offensive lines in 2023. So you can see all of those teams on the screen right now. Starting out, Philadelphia, then you've got Cleveland, then you've got Detroit, Atlanta, Dallas, Baltimore, Kansas City, Minnesota, Green Bay, and Denver. So with the exception of Dallas, Atlanta, and Cleveland, all of those other offensive lines have running backs that are going in later rounds that fantasy analysts are just not big on and not discussing enough. And with the knowledge that we have now about the undisputable correlation between offensive line success and efficient running backs, we need to target running backs with good offensive lines. And the beauty about it is a lot of these guys are mid-round running backs. So let's take a look at some of those guys right now. So let's look at the top offensive line in the NFL heading into 2023. We're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles this time. And Philadelphia has two new running backs in their system, and really we don't know which one of them at this point is going to be the main guy. The beauty about that is that they're both mid-round guys. You look at DeAndre Swift, he is in the 7th round of both underdog drafts and ESPN drafts. Very affordable price to get a player with very high upside, but of course hasn't lived up to it. But his offensive line will help maintain his efficiency. Rashad Penny as well, historically a very efficient running back, just hasn't played enough in his NFL career. Maybe that changes this year. And at the range that you're getting him at, I have said all offseason, I think Rashad Penny is a very worthy shot. You're getting him in the 9th round on underdog drafts, and you're getting him in the 11th round of ESPN drafts. You have to target an Eagles running back this year, one way or the other. I will let you choose who you prefer. I prefer Rashad Penny because of the price, and I think that Rashad Penny is a better ball carrier than DeAndre Swift is. DeAndre Swift's strengths are his pass catching ability. The problem with that is that he is going from a very immobile quarterback in his career, Jared Goff and Matt Stafford, to one of the most mobile quarterbacks in the NFL. And what we know about mobile quarterbacks is they don't check the ball down to their running back. That's what immobile quarterbacks do. Mobile quarterbacks can make a play with their own legs. Now let's move on to the number 3 offensive line. We're talking about the Detroit Lions here. So obviously when you're talking about Detroit, you have an early round running back going, Jahmyr Gibbs, a top 15 pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. Let's say you don't want to take that risk on Jahmyr Gibbs, who, by the way, I've had pushback for saying this, but I don't think he has as high of a ceiling this year in fantasy as a lot of people do because of David Montgomery. David Montgomery got a really good contract from Detroit this offseason that gave him guaranteed money that exceeded over half of the value of his contract. The guaranteed money is the paper trail we need to follow in NFL contracts, because that shows us if they put a man that they are guaranteeing over half of his contract, if they stick him on the bench, they will look like fools for doing that. Detroit is not going to stick David Montgomery on the bench. He is going to serve in the Jamal Williams type of role that he served in last year with Detroit. And who was the better fantasy back? The pass catcher, or was it the runner who dominated in carries last year in Detroit? It was Jamal Williams, who was a top 12 fantasy back last year at half PPR. And David Montgomery is going in the 7th round on both underdog and ESPN. Take that late shot because he's got the offensive line attached to him. There is no question here that he is in the cards for scoring over 10 touchdowns this year. Then we can move on to the Ravens offensive line. They've got J.K. Dobbins, and I understand that J.K. Dobbins is a very tricky player right now. Obviously, he's going through the hold-in, and reports are that he's not even healthy yet. So it's a very tricky situation here. But what I will say is if that he is healthy, he's going to play. He has no choice. So don't let the fear of him sitting out deter you from picking J.K. Dobbins where he is going, because he's going in the 6th round on underdog, in the 8th round on ESPN. Those are very good values for a guy who ran for 5.7 yards per carry last year and has more upside to do much better with more volume this year. And we can also look at Isaiah Pacheco. Isaiah Pacheco on the Kansas City Chiefs offense, again, not healthy right now, but he's going in the 8th and 7th round on Underdog and ESPN. Absolutely a worthy swing now that they are not messing around with Clyde Edwards-Helaire as their starting running back. Pacheco is going to lead this backfield the day he is healthy. Mark that down. And Alexander Mattison on the Minnesota Vikings here. Going in the 5th to 6th round, a little bit more expensive than the others, but he is still going to have top 12 upside, and a large part of that is due to the offensive line. I think the most important message of this particular draft strategy is that whether you want to go 0 running back or 1 hero running back, if that's the draft strategy you want to pick, this strategy works with either one of them. And if you want to know another draft strategy that compares so well with this one while raising the ceiling of your team even more, click on this video right here.